Hi, thank you for tuning in. My name is Voorhees. Today I will be talking about my time as an LRGF fellow and reflecting on how Krell has affected both my graduate experience and my career trajectory. I am one of the first LRGF alumni, and I'm currently working as an R&D engineer at Sandia National Laboratories. For a quick overview of the topics that I'll be going over today, I'm going to start out with a quick self-introduction. Who am I? How did I get into LRGF? And where am I today? Then I'll be getting into the benefits of the LRGF, specifically what do I think helps me the most throughout my career or throughout my graduate experience. Then I'll get into some advice for residencies, and I'll conclude with advice for new fellows. So, for a quick background about me, I grew up in San Diego, California, and in 2010 moved to Los Angeles, where I went to school at Cal Poly Pomona for college. I got a BS in chemical engineering there, and competed as a track and field athlete while also doing research with Dr. Vilepin Ravi on hip implant materials and trying to make them last longer in the human body. In 2014, he got me in contact with Dr. Naresh Shadani, and in 2015, I began working on a PhD in material science and engineering with Dr. Shadani, doing impact experiments like the one shown here in this video. Now, between 2015 and 2017, this research is really sort of odd projects, doing small projects for people like Army TARDEC and SAIC. And in 2017, we were funded with a larger project by Los Alamos National Laboratory through Dr. Anthony Frenberg, looking at the shock compaction behavior of various brittle granular materials. So this project is what constructed my thesis, and it was combined with experimental work at Georgia Tech and primarily modeling and simulation work at Los Alamos. Now, a year into that project, when I had learned a lot more about granular materials, became very interested in them, I applied to the LRGF with that project and was funded as one of the inaugural LRGF fellows. Now, in 2020, during the times of COVID, I finished my thesis, defended it, and graduated. And in late 2020, in December, I was hired on at Sandia National Laboratories as a staff member in 8363, where my mentor is Tracy Vogler, and I primarily work on impact experiments and multi-physics simulations. So, for a very high-level overview of my area of research, I work in shock physics and granular materials. What I do is I combine high precision experiments, so whether it's an impact or just high pressure, high strain rate loading, and computational models, so typically things run in like CTH or FLAG, the hydrocodes of the labs, to generate better predictive capabilities. We run these experiments, we calibrate models to the experiments, and use that to both validate and improve our different computer codes. So what I work on is trying to combine measurements that we can do before an experiment and try and get a better measurement or a better prediction of what the bulk response of the material would be. So we combine things like the matrix properties. Now for a granular material, what that would be is properties of the individual grain. For porous material, that would be the skeleton, is what the matrix would be. So for a sponge, that would be the plastic. The granular bulk properties, so that's like initial density and shape, and loading conditions, so whether it's an impact, a penetration, or an explosion, we're just trying to model the bulk response with high precision and high accuracy. So here's an example of one of my current projects at Sandia. And what I'm trying to do is characterize the dynamic strength of a wide swath of brittle granular materials. The way that I do that is create a Rickmeyer Meshkov instability between a well-characterized driver or metallic material and the uncharacterized or material of interest, which is the TAMP or granular material. So I'll be using driver and TAMP to describe those two materials throughout this explanation. Here on the top left, I have a CAD drawing that shows the target geometry in comparison to a US quarter, and that gives us just a feel for the size of these experiments. What we do is we take this target geometry and we hang it at the DCS or dynamic compression sector at Argonne National Laboratory, and then impact it with a 50 caliber gun. Now when we impact it on this side, if we hit it hard enough, we can actually invert the perturbation that's machined into the driver material, or this metallic material. If we hit it hard enough, this sine wave inverts and turns into a Rickmeyer-Meshkov instability between the driver and the tamp materials. Now what we're actually doing when we're impacting it is we're first sending a shock wave through the granular material, which brings it to a shock compressed state, or a state of higher pressure, density, and energy, and then we deform it as this Rickmeyer-Meshkov instability grows and arrests. And the arrest behavior is a function of the combined strength between the driver, the material on the left, and the tamp, or the material on the right. So by doing these experiments at a variety of different impact velocities, we can look at how the strength of this granular material changes as a function of pressure. And what this growth and arrest behavior looks like is shown well here in this simulation in the middle, this video. So you can see the yellow driver material inverting and creating a Rickmeyer-Meshkov instability that penetrates into the granular material. Now, the way that we get strength measurements is by running simulations, varying the strength of the granular material and the driver if it's unknown, but for the most part we're using well-characterized driver materials. And once we have a correlation between the simulated images and the experimental images, or the jet length in both the simulations and the experiments, we can get different yield versus pressure points. So the strength of the material is a function of the pressure that's being brought up to. And once we have those data points, we can fit a nice strength model to the material, which shows its full yield surface. So this is what we're doing to characterize a lot of different brittle granular materials like sand and other geologic materials. So now that I've introduced myself, I want to talk about the most significant benefits of the LRGF, in my opinion. I do want to point out, I put 2 asterisks here, that this is my personal opinion. It's not influenced by my past or present employers or funders. And what's going to be broken up into is funding, time, freedom, and being part of this prestigious and welcoming community. The first benefit that I want to talk about is money. And I think that the financial support that Krell provides is incredibly helpful as a graduate student. And for me personally, it helped me live a lot more comfortably throughout my graduate experience. Here I have some quantitative data that I received in 2018 when I was working as the president of the Graduate Student Advisory Group in the MSc department at Georgia Tech. We sent out surveys trying to gauge student income and whether people were able to make ends meet with the current stipend. So this received 71 student responses, and from the responses we found that people's income was accounting for, or 45% of people's income was accounting for rent if they were living off campus, and 52% of their income was being spent on rent if they were living on campus. Now, for reference, if you're spending 30% of your income just on rent, that labels you as cost burdened or rent burdened. So I was in this area. I was up at about 45% of my income being spent directly on rent. And when I gained the LRGF fellowship, that increased my take-home salary. So my salary after fees, after health insurance, and after taxes by 43%. So that lowered me down to 25% of my income being spent only on rent. And I was able to use the rest of that income to live much more comfortably, buying much better groceries and just enjoying myself more. Down here on the bottom, I also have responses from the GRA income satisfaction, which shows that of the 71 people that submitted responses, only 13% of them were able to make ends meet with only the stipend. So 87% of them were finding some other form of income on top of their stipend. So for me, being part of the Krell Institute, I did not have to find other income. I was able to only focus on my research, and having this financial benefit made life just much easier in Atlanta, Georgia. One thing that I also want to talk about is the allowance. The allowance that Krell provides can be used for travel fees and can be used for a lot of different things, and that's really helpful for getting your name out there as a fellow. But I also used it for building a high-performance Linux server that significantly expedited analyzing my thesis data. So here it is shown on the left, and it's this large black box. It's right next to a mini fridge. It's about the size of a mini fridge. And here are the tech specs of it listed on the right. So it has 8 cores, 16 threads, runs at 5 gigahertz for the CPU, has a Titan RTX, which can be run at a higher clock rate as well, uh, with 24 gigabytes of VRAM, so very good for running deep learning or GPU type codes. It has 128 gigs of RAM that are clocked at 3000 megahertz, 21 terabytes of storage, so both HDDs and SSDs. Runs Linux and has a small partition for Windows to do CAD drawings, so like SolidWorks, and is partially water cooled, which allows it to run at higher clock rates without overheating. So this computer really helped me with my data analysis and helped me create something called Hi-Fi PDV, which is a brute force PDV code that calculates your systematic uncertainty for velocimetry data. Now that we've talked about money, let's talk about time. So one of the biggest things that the LRGF helped me with was giving me more time to spend on research. Before I was part of the Krell Fellowship, I had to TA every year, and TAing takes about 6 to 8 weeks of the year, where you're working 40 or more hours per week. I was a lab TA, and I ran a lab where we would do mechanical forming, so rolling, and we would also do casting, solidification, to look at microstructural evolution. This was a very hands-on class. We would create different samples and then analyze them for the following weeks. And it was a great experience. I learned how to be a better teacher, how to be a better mentor through it, but it did take a huge amount of time. And when I joined the Krell Fellowship, I no longer had to TA, which gave me back 240 to 320 work hours per year. This amounts to an entire chapter of my thesis. So just removing the TA burden that I had as a grad student allowed me to get so much more research done. And I thank the Krell Institute profusely for giving me that time. The third thing that I want to talk about is community. And the SSGF LRGF community is welcoming and helpful. Here on the top left, I have the SSGF and LRGF fellows from 2018, so it was the first year that I joined. And then throughout the rest of the pictures, I have meeting up with the fellows at either different program reviews or different conferences. Here's the White House, here's Abraham Lincoln, here's Portland, so for a SHOT conference. What I'm trying to point out here is that these people that are in the fellowship, whether they're actual fellows, alumni, sponsors, program coordinators, they are the people that are going to be your future or present coworkers if you move on to the national laboratories, or people that you call on for expertise if you go into academia or some other area like industry. So being a part of this prestigious community is absolutely helpful for whatever you do in your career. The next two sections are advice, and there are things that I've found throughout the years that I think would be helpful for current fellows that are looking at doing residencies around Los Alamos, and for incoming fellows. Starting out with housing, finding housing at Los Alamos is incredibly difficult. I recommend starting your search 6 or more months ahead of time and booking your housing 4 to 6 months ahead of time. You can use sites like Airbnb. I used that one year. It's very easy but very expensive. Students at Lanel, that's a Facebook group that you can join, and people make posts for rooms. You can use Craigslist. I've heard that's good. There's a student housing website that's part of the Lanel webpage. And there's also another site called Intern Housing. I used that one year as well. I would say highly consider having a roommate. You'll spend less money and have more fun. You can find a roommate at the Students at Lanel webpage or Facebook page. And I would say you should expect to pay somewhere between $700 and $800 per month for a room in someone's house. During your residency, I recommend going on as many field trips as you possibly can. Here's an example of a field trip that I went on with the XTD division. We went to the Trinity site, so here are the people I went with, my student cohort and their mentors. And we got to see the place where they put together the gadget. We got to see Trinitite, pick it up, hold it, can't take it home. We got to see Jumbo, its post-mortem state. And this was just an incredible situation to be able to go to White Sands Missile a test range and be the only people at the Trinity site for the day. I also recommend that you don't bury yourself in work and see local attractions, so you don't have to go on a field trip to travel. I did a lot of things that were really close to the Los Alamos area. I helped out with hummingbird banding with Joe Schmidt, who's in XTDNTA. I went to Meow Wolf with my fiance, and that's art exhibit that you walk through and interact with. That was a lot of fun. And in the Pajarito Mountain, Bandelier, and Hemis area, we did a lot of hikes, a lot of camping, and just had a lot of outdoor fun. There's also a summer concert series that you should check out if you're in the Los Alamos area. So my final piece of advice is for the new fellows. I say network as much as you possibly can. The people that are here are going to be your coworkers in the future. Um, I also say use your allowance to do something that's going to help your thesis move forwards. Finally, be confident that your work is important. What you're doing is helping keep people safe, and you should feel proud of that. So that concludes my talk. Thank you all for your time, and please either email me or reach out to me if you have any questions.